themselves. And certainly we anticipate and hope that the vast majority of them will be back, but that will ultimately be their decision. Secondly, I think is just the very thoughtful, intentional, choreographed nature of this plan. We met last night with the student athletes. We've communicated with them again frequently throughout this experience, but last night we shared the contours of this plan, and it's disappointing for me. I know it was disappointing for some of them that we're only in a position to return 5 teams back over the course of the summer. But as we focused on that first consideration, health and safety, we realized that our bandwidth is the term that we're using a lot, limits how quickly and the number of people that we can return during the summer months, whether you're talking about our facilities and our spaces, you're talking about staffing, testing, all those things put limitations on how many people we can safely have here during these coming months. And so we had to narrow it down, and we're now, as you've seen, focusing, starting with football, men's basketball. We'll come back some point June 3rd or slightly thereafter, likely between June 3rd and June 8th. We're still pinning down final dates. And then they'll go through a series of screenings, quarantining, and we anticipate starting some level of voluntary workouts with them around June 11th, again, maybe a few days after that. We'll then take a small break, evaluate how that return process went with those 2 teams, make any necessary tweaks, and then look to return our next 3 sports, women's basketball, volleyball, soccer, sometime around the 1st of July. In that week there, maybe we may wait and bring them back that Monday after the 4th, July 6th, I believe it is. And then they'll go through the same process of return to campus and screenings, quarantining, and before they begin their workouts. Well, then the next group would be cross country. That would probably happen sometime mid-August, maybe a week or so prior to when their normal report date would be. Again, recognizing what some of these onboarding procedures will look like and the time that they will take. And then most of the rest of the sports will then return in a similar timeline with the general student body, in conjunction with what we hope is the start of a fall semester. Last point I'll make, and then stop and answer any questions. As kind of referenced there in that last statement, obviously we still don't know what the fall will look like in terms of return to in-person instruction, return to competition, whether you're talking about football or any of the rest of our fall sports. We anticipate those decisions coming in the next 4 to 6 weeks. But we also know that for most of our student athletes, this has been the longest interruption to their training that most of them have probably experienced perhaps since middle school. And we're cognizant of the fact that once we get the green light to resume competition, we want them to be in a place physically to minimize risk of injury and to be able to compete at the level that they expect. And so it was important to us, once the NCAA opened the door for campus returns on a voluntary basis, that we provide that opportunity to as many student athletes as we felt we could, responsibly and in a way that provides for their health and safety. And we're excited to get them back and begin that process here over the weeks ahead. So with that, we'll stop and allow Kent to get us through some Q&A here.
All right, we'll start off with Jeremy Werner. Nico, you're on deck. Matt Stevens, you're in the hole. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Hey, Josh, good afternoon. Just first of all, what gives you confidence? You're not the only athletic department to do this, but what gives you guys confidence that you can pull this off?
Well, it's something, as you would imagine, we've been working on this for many weeks. We've had a lot of great conversations and collaboration with many experts in the areas of community health and epidemiology. And the other thing is, what's nice is that we're able to steal ideas from a lot of other organizations that are trying to do the same things. And so, we've seen the same kinds of plans put together by the NBA, by the NFL, by the United States Olympic Committee. We've been able to talk about what's happening amongst our peers within the Big Ten. I know that Many of our colleagues across the conference are working on similar plans along similar timelines. And so we've got a great group of people. We feel like we've been able to benchmark against best in class, if you will. Again, it's an evolving situation, but have great confidence in our sports medicine team and in the information we've been able to receive from a number of experts, not just here locally, but across the country.
And just to follow up, I know you guys don't know exactly when the rest of the student body will be here, but obviously student athletes are coming on campus a little bit before then. Is that just because of training or sheer numbers? It doesn't compare to the regular student body? How do you kind of jive those two things?
I'm sorry, Jeremy, I'm not totally following your question.
Just that the whole student body isn't back on campus yet, but student athletes will be. Some people might have questions about why that would be.
Yeah, I think that it's a couple things. One, obviously, we're in the summer period now anyway, and in a typical summer, we often will have student athletes back here at a time when the vast majority of our students are not. And I think that the primary reason, as you heard me say just a moment ago, is that recognizing that our student athletes at this point in time are probably in at least as varied a shape as we've ever seen, and as probably as they've ever been in the last number of years of their life. And so we want to be sure that, you know, we're finding that balance between protecting their own physical health from a soft tissue perspective, you know, recognizing they haven't had access to equipment, to facilities, to coaching, and we want to give them as much runway as we can to get back to a point of consistent physical training so that they're prepared for the rigors of what the fall will bring. But also, we certainly wouldn't do it if we weren't comfortable that we've been able to put a plan together that really did provide for their health in the face of the virus. That's why it's taken us this long, candidly, to get to this point. I think that across the country, we're all starting to reach a point of confidence based on the information sharing and the understanding that we're starting to gain around the virus, that we can do this in a health conscious way and provide for the safety of our student athletes.
Thanks, Josh.
Nico, you're up.
Josh, I know the plan kind of lays out bringing back football and basketball first in kind of waves. How will that process kind of work in terms of maybe how many people per wave per day? What's kind of the thought behind, you know, bringing in those waves of students at first?
Well, the biggest thought is just, again, I would use that term bandwidth. It's recognizing that, you know, the ability to administer tests, to receive results on those tests, to have the personnel in place to welcome those people back, to get them through a quarantine period, you know, all that requires a certain capacity. And we felt like, I think each group or each wave, if you will, is around 35 to 45 people. My recollection is that the first group is largely our returners. I think then we have a lot of our first years, and then some other folks who may present with some of the higher risk indicators would come back after we have a sense of everybody else and what their conditions are. And so they'll come back in I think 3 or more waves, in that number 35 to 45 based on the guidance from our sports medicine staff is what we feel comfortable we can accommodate in a given day or a period of days.
I know you kind of touched on that. Is the order kind of going to be maybe getting some of those first year student athletes in so they can get acclimated a little bit? And is there, you know, maybe an idea for the rest of the order of getting some other students in after that?
Well, I kind of laid out the order that we're anticipating there. We'll have our base returners. We'll have our first year student athletes, freshmen, transfers, and then we'll have some of our last group, which may be some folks who have either been exposed to the virus, have been around maybe in some geographic locations where the virus has been a little more prominent. You know, there's a lot of factors that would go into that determination, but it'll all be very scripted by our sports medicine staff, and again, bringing everybody back in a thoughtful and very choreographed way.
Thanks, Josh.
Yep.
Okay, Matt Stevens, Scott Ritchie, you're on deck.
Josh, could you kind of explain the coordination that this plan has had and you and the university officials have had with Governor Pritzker and his plan for his gradual reopening for the state? And if you have any concerns as to whether or not this could be a conflict to the gradual reopening plan that he introduced for multiple areas of the state?
Yeah, I don't have those concerns. We've consulted with the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District. We've been in conversations with the governor's office as recently as this morning, and so we're certainly, again, operating with completely above board and trying to get as much input as we can from all different stakeholders. So we appreciate the input that we're receiving from a number of different entities, including the governor's office, and we'll continue to incorporate that into our plan. And the one thing about the plan is it's continually evolving, right? We all understand that the things that we know about this are changing almost by the day. Best practices and standards are changing by the day, and so we're going to always be looking to keep it updated and make sure that it's incorporating all the most recent information that we have at our disposal.
The follow-up would be, would it be accurate to kind of say that the hospital style cleaning that has to be done after every workout, after all those types of things, not only has been talked about, but might be might need more people, more personnel to kind of get this taken care of?
Yeah, I don't know that it'll require more personnel. I think it'll require perhaps a reallocation of existing personnel. And so certainly, we'll have, the nice thing is, you think about those of you who've been in the Smith Center, just as an example, we have a pretty sizable weight room. And so if you think about that weight room, it was built to accommodate the 40 or 50 student athletes at one time. We're now talking about having 6 to 8 student athletes at one time, and the space that can create. The level of detail is really pretty impressive when you think about some of the guidance in the plan would include things like the student athletes are going to work out with the people they live with. So you're minimizing the number of contacts that you're having with people that are outside of kind of your direct and immediate circle. We'll have them working out with the same coaches each and every day. So you're minimizing that relationship. They'll be assigned a singular rack. Just to use that piece of equipment as an example, that's their rack. That's where they're going to be. They'll be on that rack every single day. And then in between groups, to your point, we'll be coming in with our facility staff and doing extensive cleaning. It won't require more personnel, but it will perhaps. And that's one of the when I talk about bandwidth, by keeping other facilities closed, we're able to take staff who are generally working in those facilities and reallocate them to the facilities that will be coming open. And so it allows us to make sure that we have the appropriate personnel in place to get the things done that need to be done.
Okay, Scott Ritchie, you're up. Scott Beatty, you're on deck.
But I remembered to unmute myself. In March, it took one positive test for the NBA to suspend its season. And 10 weeks later, here we are. What could maybe the potential of positive tests or tests do with your plan, and what would be the impact there?
I think that's certainly a possibility. I think we all recognize that no matter what we do in any of our individual lives, the risk of infection is always there. Certainly, we're intending to do everything we know to do to keep that risk at an absolute minimum. But nothing we can do is going to make an absolute guarantee that none of our student athletes will be infected with the virus. And so if that happens, we have made arrangements. We'll be quarantining those student athletes away from the rest, as you would imagine, providing care for them for the minimum of 14 days, if not beyond, depending on the symptoms that they may continue to exhibit. We'll have to work through, as you would in any other situation, contact tracing. Again, all these procedures we've talked about will make that a little more palpable. And if we know that, okay, this young man has worked out with this individual and this coach every day and hasn't had contact with these other people, it'll provide a much more narrow field that we can identify to do additional quarantining and provide additional care. So the whole plan is really built around that, is just trying to make sure that we have small groups of people together. We make record of who those groups are. We put steps in place to minimize the risk of infection, but allows us, so if an infection should occur, we're able to identify who's been in contact with that person and make sure that we make appropriate steps to protect those people as well.
I suppose not exactly a follow-up, but my second question, you alluded to maybe the fluidity of voluntary workouts when it comes to athletics. How have you communicated that with coaches and staff, and maybe what's kind of been their feedback reaction to that?
Communicated it a lot like I just communicated it to all of you. I think that it's, we need to understand that this is a different time, that we need to continue to allow people to make choices that are in their own best interests and the best interests of their health and the health of the people around them. We have said this to the student athletes, and we'll continue to reiterate it to them, both in writing and through various meetings. And the coaches, to their credit, and I can't say enough good things about them. From the first day that we started having immediate and dramatic changes as a result of the pandemic back in March, they have been quick to set aside personal agendas, to set aside their competitive juices, to really prioritize our community's health, their health, our student athletes' health. And so everybody continues to understand that as our first and foremost priority. And we'll work through that. Again, we'll see as we work through this how many student athletes may choose not to participate, but I don't candidly expect it to be a huge number. But for those who do, we'll respect that decision, and we'll continue to support them from a distance.
Thanks, Josh.
Yep.
All right, Scott Beatty, you're up. Adam Rittenberg, you're on deck.
Thanks, Josh. Could you comment at least broadly on what the nature of the workouts will be like? Are they conditioning only? Are they sport-specific drills? What kind of instruction can coaches give? Is that changed at all with what would normally be in place with NCAA regulations?
Yeah, so as some of you know, the football, men's basketball, women's basketball is a little bit unique under the NCAA structure, in that under NCAA rules, those three sports are allowed what's called required team activities over the course of the summer, usually starting in June. As this situation, of course, has unfolded, it's changed those guidelines. And so now during the month of June, as the NCAA announced this week, only voluntary activities are allowed. So that does change a bit the posture of the coaching staff. They go from really conducting workouts to supervising workouts. And they're accustomed to that. There are other points in time during the year, during a normal year, when that's the case as well. And so during final exams, for example, is a good example of when sometimes you would see that, so that they understand the distinction between supervising, conducting. June will be about supervising those workouts. They can still schedule those workouts. They can still provide direction in terms of what kinds of activities should be performed. But it won't be the same level of involvement as you'll see probably later in the summer. The NCAA to date hasn't issued an updated timeline on when these required activities could be allowed to begin. We anticipate it could be around the 1st of July, although we're waiting further guidance from the NCAA on when that might happen. But assuming it does happen, and whenever it does, then that changes a little bit the level of engagement that the coaching staff can have with them. And certainly that changes in basketball as well. Basketball is different than football in that they're allowed some more on-court opportunities between the sport coaches and the student athletes, as opposed to in football, where it's really driven by the strength coaching staff. So a lot still to come. We have a pretty good sense of what June can look like, but we're still waiting some guidance on how that transition may happen into what would be considered a more ordinary summer under previous NCAA guidelines. So, but even again, just to reiterate a point, once we get into, there is that term required. That is not a term that we'll be using this summer for our young men and women, even after that page turn, so to speak, in terms of the level of engagement from the staff.
And can some of the simple things that happen in workouts, like passing a basketball or throwing a football and catching it, can those things still happen?
Yeah, we're working through some of those protocols now. We focused a lot of our attention on strength conditioning training, work that would occur in a weight room or on an outside field. We're encouraging as much of our activities to happen outside as possible in the open air with the sunlight. But we do recognize that and so we won't do any, especially during the month of June, there won't be any workouts that involve ball activities, whether it's, throwing passes, getting shots up. But we recognize that our student athletes are going to want to do those things. And so we've charged our sports medicine group with developing protocols around how to safely handle a basketball or a football out. We're not going to go straight to allowing 5-on-5 pickup games or 7-on-7 with football. There will be a step process that, again, coordinates with guidance from local health officials and from the state. And so there will be an opportunity, I would imagine, for them to, again, to start shooting on their own, start playing a game of catch between a receiver and a quarterback. But that'll be very, again, like everything else, choreographed and with a lot of protocol in place around cleaning of those balls and making sure that we're not sharing those balls too broadly amongst too big of a group.
Hey, Adam, you're up, and Marla, you're on deck.
Hey, Josh, I'm wondering what element of this process have you gained the most confidence in to get to this point, whether that's testing, how you guys will react if there's a positive test, or something else that's gotten to you most confident right now?
Yeah, Adam, I don't know that I could point to one thing. I think it really is as much as anything, the comprehensive nature of the plan. I feel like it's taken us some time to work through each of those different questions, whether it's the testing questions, whether it's okay, what happens if somebody presents with the virus question? It's what are we going to do about balls and wanting to get shots up and throw passes, and how are we going to handle cleanliness in the weight room and just the limitations that our facilities present in terms of space available and hours in the day. And so it's just taken us a long time to work through that process in an intentional, thoughtful way. But as it's all, and it's just really coalesced here in the last, I'd say, 10 days. We knew that we had a lot of outstanding questions, but we finally started to get some answers and felt comfortable as those things all came together that we really had the outline of a comprehensive plan that would allow us to take this next step.
And then you mentioned several times about the voluntary nature. I'm curious if you have had any feedback from not only athletes or parents of athletes about their concerns about them returning and things like that over the last few weeks.
We haven't. We really haven't heard much from them expressing any reservation. I think if anything, to characterize their emotions, I think they're enthusiastic. They're excited. As I said, I wish, if anything, last night's call was hard for me because I wanted to be able to tell them all that we were going to open the doors wide open and they could all come flooding back to campus. And I know for some of them, they were ready for that message, and it was disappointing to hear that we weren't going to be in a position to facilitate kind of that mass return in a short period of time. So my sense is that they're excited to be back. I think that all of us obviously long for some return to normalcy, and so, as I said, we'll work through those situations with individual students if they present themselves. But right now we're excited about the group.
Okay, Marla, you're up. Derek Piper, you're on deck.
Hi, Josh. I was just wondering about, in the sense, if this plan is able to be executed successfully, will this maybe shine a light on or allow you guys to maybe be a trailblazer of bringing back fall sports on time? I know no official decisions have really been made about the fall, but is this an important step that you feel needs to be taken looking ahead?
Well, the last way you said that, I think is absolutely yes. I think it clearly is an important step. It's a step we're excited about. We're not in any way the only sports organization doing this. We've seen it now in a number of different professional sports settings. We've seen it from a variety of colleges and universities here over the last several days, in particular, making announcements of various plans. And like I said, I know for a fact that many of our peers across the Big Ten are also developing theirs and close to putting something in place that looks very similar in terms of timing. But I do think, we always want to be on the front end in terms of providing leadership and a model that others can follow. And we think at the University of Illinois, given the great strengths that we have in the sciences, our new Illinois College of Medicine, a lot of the relationships that we've formed across our community and across industry, we think that we're in a position to really, to use your term, I think, shine a light on how to do things, how to be innovative, how to be at the front of the pack when it comes to using technology and collaboration to identify solutions to hard problems. And certainly we've seen that play out time and again over the university's history. And if this is another example of that, then I think that's something that the university can be proud of.
Do you feel like this is almost like a beacon of hope that Illini fans need given this time, and that, sports are coming back in this little way?
It is for me. I would hope that it is for our fans as well. I think that if nothing else, over these last couple months, for me personally and from a lot of the people I've spoken to, I think we've all realized the role that sports plays in our lives and in broader society. And it's they always say you never know what you had until you've lost it. And here for these last couple months, there's been a void. I think there's no debating that. And if we can provide some little kernels of hope here over the next several weeks, months that lead up to a culminating moment of a kickoff of a football game or the first serve of a volleyball match, to me that's pretty exciting. And so again, there's no promises yet about what this means for the fall, but I would hope people would view it as an encouraging step and something that can maybe give them a little ray of light at the end of the tunnel that we can all walk toward together.
Okay, Derek Piper, you're up. Gabby, you're on deck.
Hey, Josh, hope we're doing well. You mentioned players working out with players that they live with as a way to control the amount of contact. To that point, do you expect there to be a major difference in how students are housed versus, players having roommates or just their overall experience away from the playing field?
Sure. I think a lot of that guidance is still forthcoming from the university. We don't pretend to be the experts when it comes to campus housing. I know that I've been in some of these conversations. I know that obviously these are active questions that are being considered every day by our colleagues across campus. I think there will always be a distinction between on-campus living and off-campus living. Of course, the university is going to have a lot more control over how housing is handled in university residence halls and some of the private certified housing, maybe to a lesser extent. Once you get off into the apartments, probably not as much control. I think our guidance is, we're going to try and encourage our student athletes who do live off campus to live in smaller numbers, whether it's 2, 4 people. I think we're going to try and discourage the big houses where you got a dozen football players live together like we did back when I was here. So that I think we're going to continue to try and educate. That's a big part of this, to encourage our student athletes to make informed adult decisions about what's in the best interest of their health and the health of those around them. And to the extent we can exert some influence over that, we will.
Okay, Gabby, you're up. Jim Cotter, you're on deck.
Hi, Josh. Just when it comes to sports like golf and tennis, how do you kind of keep those teams maybe motivated or just progressing towards a hopeful fall semester and just fall season when they're not going to be able to be on campus or kind of working together over the summer?
Well, I think we have a lot of sports that straddle that fall, spring season. So we've got, for example, the golf programs, as you mentioned, the tennis programs, swimming starts in October and runs through March. I mean, in reality, I think as we all know, being a high major Division I athlete is a 12-month a year proposition, no matter what sport you're in. And so, we expect, and I think that all of our student athletes have demonstrated this, at least in the conversations I've had. They've continued to remain very motivated over these last couple months. We would expect that motivation will continue, if not grow, as we get closer to hopefully an official start with the fall semester. And so we know that, again, there's going to be some frustrations by some sports who would say we'd like to be back. The nice thing about golf and tennis, to use the two examples you did, is that those facilities are becoming available in most states. Golf courses are open, and those student athletes would have access to those. Here in Illinois, we'll be reopening tennis courts here in the next couple weeks. And so they will have access to facilities, and we'll continue to provide them with virtual training, the same as we have over these last couple months. We'll do everything we can to remain supportive and keep everybody in line and motivated as we head toward the fall.
Did that access kind of, like you said, the reopening of golf courses and tennis courts, did that play a factor into this decision to probably not include them in the summer plan, or is that just kind of an after effect?
No, really. I mean, the determining those 5 sports was really based on, okay, how many student athletes can we actually host here? How many do we have the capacity to have? We really didn't talk about, well, they could go to that place to continue to do their things, or they have an alternative. It was really based on, okay, what are our true fall sports, those sports that start that are designated fall sports by the NCAA, that have a preseason period that generally starts in early August, as well as in the case of the basketballs. As I mentioned, they're unique under NCAA structure because of some of the access they're provided to coaching during the summer. So that was really what drove the prioritization, if you will, as we identified which sports to include in that number once we had a sense of what that number could be from a capacity perspective.
Hey, Jim Cotter, you're up. Joey Wagner, you're on deck.
Hi, Josh. Good afternoon. I know you've talked about the coaches coming back. Do you have a specific plan in place about how to bring them back, and if so, and what numbers do you want to bring them back in as well?
We do, yeah. Everything around the programs has been scheduled, and so we'll be bringing back a lot of our support personnel before the student athletes, people who need to be here to greet the student athletes, be part of their onboarding. So the groups you would imagine, sports medicine, strength conditioning, equipment, those will all come back. Facilities will come back in advance of their respective teams. The student athletes will then come back, and then we'll bring back the coaching staffs actually after the student athletes are returned shortly thereafter, kind of right at the tail end. And the nice thing is, at least talking about football and basketball, many of you are familiar with those facilities, but we'll have very strict protocols in place for who has access. It won't be, using football as an example, we won't be inviting back all, whatever the number is, 45 or 50 football staff members. It will be a much more limited number. Same thing in basketball. In our buildings, our staffs are really operating on the second floor, and our student athletes are generally on the first floor. There will be a very clear line of demarcation, expectation set that the group that's on one floor doesn't go to the group on the other. And so we'll have a separate entrance and exit set up for the staffs that are working on the second floor. We'll have separate protocols for them relative to different spaces and amenities that are available. They won't be allowed, for example, to work out in the weight rooms that are being used by the student athletes. We won't allow in-person interaction between the student athletes and the coaches, at least here at the beginning. So it'll all be very detailed, and again, not everyone that works with those teams will be allowed back at the outset, and we'll be very cautious about how we manage the facilities to make sure we avoid interaction between the students and the coaching staffs.
And kind of as a follow-up to that, I don't know if you directly answered this question yet or not, but the few athletes that come back in the first wave, are you going to kind of keep them housed together as so far as to keep things more centralized instead of having people spread across campus?
So we'll quarantine everybody together in a campus residence hall when they get back to campus. We'll do that in single rooms. Once they clear out of that through a period of testing and they present with negative tests, then we'll be pushing them back out into their campus residences or their, if they have on-campus apartments, whatever it might be. Those who don't have apartments will be housed in campus residence halls. There's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversation about the right way to approach that. There's one train of thought that would say, take everybody and put them together and sort of lock the doors and try and keep them from the outside world. The other train of thought, which is the one that we've chosen to adopt, is that, recognizing that we're not going to be able to lock the doors. These are grown people who are going to make their own decisions about how to spend their off hours. We can provide them guidance. We can make suggestions. But we would prefer to have them a little bit spaced out so that, to a point that someone made earlier, if one of the athletes does in fact become infected with the virus, we're limiting that circle of touch to a group of 2 people who live with them in an apartment, as opposed to seeing it run through an entire team that's been living in a group of 50 and on a floor of a residence hall. So that's our general approach. We'll put them together right at the outset, and then we'll send them out to their individual residences, and that we think that will better allow us to maintain social distance and to keep any virus events that occur limited into more discrete locations.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
Okay, Joey Wagner, you're up. Jim Batson, you're on deck.
Hey, Josh, I know you mentioned the 3 phases: the returners, the first-year transfers, and the people who maybe have been in a higher affected area. But within that group of returners, I would assume that's going to be your largest group of student athletes. How did you decide kind of in what groups to bring them back? Was it how they would, or where they would live when they were on campus, or where had they been for the last 2 months? I guess, how do you break that bigger group down into smaller groups?
Yeah, well, that might be a better question for Randy, and Randy's on the line here. But I think that in general, our expectation is that we'll be able to bring that returning group back essentially in one wave. I don't think that there really is a stratification in terms of, okay, within that 45 people, we're going to bring back this 5 and then this 5. But maybe Randy, I'd pause there and see if I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah, one thing Josh hasn't mentioned is our athletic training staff engagement with our student athletes, both on a day-to-day basis when they're on campus, but also when they've been home. And so our awareness of what they've been doing, have they been exposed? But before we ever go to return them back, we've developed an online tool that involves a questionnaire about where they've been. Have they been symptomatic? Have they been exposed to anybody who's symptomatic? Have they had any of the signs and symptoms? And so we will send that out closer to their projected return, get that information back, and then we'll finish stratifying their return based on that questionnaire that we've worked and based on health doctors and CDC guidelines about things we need to be on the lookout for. So that hasn't all been finalized, but it's going to be completely based on that questionnaire we send out 3-4 days before they head back.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Jim Matson, you're up. Patrick, you're on deck.
Real quick, just as a point of note, Randy, your title is Randy Ballard.
I'm the Director of Sports Medicine.
Director of Sports Medicine, thank you. Back to Josh. Josh, when people see the movement to advance, and you mentioned earlier kind of a point of confidence, what is kind of your message to Illini fans? I've had Illini fans say, I see this Ohio State plan with only 20,000 seats. Am I going to lose my season ticket? Are we going to have tickets? Just what is your message to Illini fans who I'm sure are going to see today as a message of hope?
Yeah, I think the general message is that we hope to continue providing those little kernels of hope along the way here over the coming weeks. not prepared today to talk about some of the plans that we've been developing related to the fan experience, and in particular football, volleyball, soccer. But needless to say, we have been active in those conversations. We've been walking parallel paths here, trying to get ready for the return of the student athletes, but also getting ready in anticipation of a fall. And what does that fall look like, from parking and tailgating to ingress and egress to security, concessions, bathrooms, concourses, premium seating, seating in general, students, bands, on-field participation. You know, the list is long in terms of considerations that go into running a home football game, and now doing it in a safe and health conscious manner in this new environment. So we will have announcements on that front in the coming weeks. We think that people will be, again, to use a word, encouraged by some of the things that we've been able to put together. We want people to know that we're being very thoughtful and intentional when it comes to their health and well-being. We're intending to create an atmosphere that we think will make everyone comfortable and will still allow them to enjoy Illinois athletics. And we're hopeful that there will be Illinois athletics to enjoy. And ultimately, that, obviously that's the big question, and not one that will be ours to make. But assuming that does come to pass, we certainly feel an obligation, and we want our fans to recognize that we're going to take every step necessary to give them a great experience, but to do it in a way that protects and looks out for them and their families.
Thank you.
Patrick, you're up. Gavin Good, you're on deck.
Josh, just wondering, what was the communication like with Commissioner Warren, and have his goals kind of clashed with any of your goals?
You cut out there for just a second. Could you ask it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. What has the communication been like with Commissioner Warren, and what are his goals, and have any of those clashed with your goals?
Commissioner Warren's been great, and I think as most on the line know, we've had almost daily teleconferences with the Big Ten athletic directors and the conference staff, including Commissioner Warren, since this pandemic started. So we've now had, I don't know the number, but it's got to be 60, 75 calls. And it's in a lot of ways been a productive exercise. We've drawn closer together as a group of colleagues than we certainly ever would have in any other circumstance. You talk about getting thrown into the fire. It's been a tough first few months for Commissioner Warren, obviously, with this entire situation unfolding. But I've been so impressed with his leadership. Been very grateful to him for his open mind, for his communication skills, for his critical thinking skills. I really haven't had any conflict with him. I think that he is in the same place that all of us are. He's trying to prioritize health and safety. He wants the conference to be a leader on the national landscape and how to host athletic events and do so in a way that's safe and health conscious for the participants, the coaches, and the fans. And certainly we're a very active participant in that effort as well. And so it's been obviously an incredibly trying situation, an incredibly tragic circumstance, but in a small sense, it's been pretty inspiring to see the way that the Big Ten has come together around this issue, and the bonds that have been formed amongst the athletic directors, the schools, and the conference have been pretty remarkable. And I think the strength that this has yielded will provide benefits to the league for a long, long time, even after this is behind us.
Hey, Josh, with this plan for voluntary return, do you think that maybe within teams and programs that, the decision to return or not might put some sort of social pressure on athletes who might not be comfortable returning at this time, but see that maybe the majority of their teammates are? And what do you think of just that situation?
I think that's certainly possible. I feel comfortable that pressure won't be coming from us, the administration, or us, the coaching staff. We'll go to great lengths to convey that message. And as I think we said in the press release, and I might have even mentioned in here already, We'll also provide a third-party non-athletics resource on campus if a student athlete doesn't feel comfortable coming forward with those kinds of concerns. Whether that kind of pressure exists within the student athlete population, I think is a slightly different question. I'm sure all of us have probably experienced some level of that in our own lives. I know just walking through the neighborhood here where I live, you'll see some people who have chosen to be pretty together in their driveways or in the street, and you see other people who are bundled up with masks and gloves, and so everybody I think has to learn how to navigate a little bit on their own in the situation, make decisions that they feel are in their own best interest. I think that in any moment of challenge, and certainly this virus is no exception, there are teaching moments here, and I think it's important for us to really encourage our student athletes to be independent, to be strong, and to not be afraid to express their voice or their opinion, even if that potentially differs from the voice or opinion of those around them. And so we've got to do a good job as leaders of effectively conveying that information to them. But at the end of the day, in that setting, in terms of teammate to teammate, they're probably going to have to stand up for themselves if they feel like they're in a different place than some of the others that they're talking to.
Thanks, Gavin. Just because Lauren Tate's on a Zoom call, I'm gonna call and ask if Lauren has a question for Josh while we're here.
Lauren, welcome to Zoom.
He's got to figure out how to.
I think he muted Kent. It's the best thing Lauren's ever done.
I think I muted him a while ago, but I can't unmute him. So anyway, Lauren's going to have to go questionless today, but he did join in and listen all day, which is pretty good. Any other questions wrap up for Josh today? Jim Matson, go ahead.
Hey, Josh, we're going to have Bobby Roundtree on later. You talked about inspiration and hope. How much inspiration and hope has he kind of provided the whole athletic department over the last year?
It's almost unquantifiable. He's a remarkable young man, and I think the two words you used are spot on to what he is and what he represents: inspiration and hope. It's remarkable to me to think that it's been a year since his accident. I'll never forget where I was when I got the call from Lovey that the accident had occurred, and to see the progress that he's made, and to watch him continue to show the degree of perseverance and commitment, it has really been nothing short of remarkable. There was a time when we just didn't imagine that anything that he's doing now would be possible, and to watch his social media posts and to have a chance to hear from him and those who are with him every single day, it is if you're looking for an uplifting story, look no further than Bobby Roundtree. He is a remarkable person, and I think the public is starting to get a sense of why he was such an influential leader on our football team. He brought that same level of work ethic, that same passion to the football field, and even in his absence now, he continues to provide this incredible example for others to follow, both in our locker room and I think across our entire Illini family. And we're just really privileged to have him as a part of our family, and to be able to be some small part of his journey, because he's got an unbelievable future, and it may look a lot different than he and many other people thought it once would, but it's going to be no less remarkable than it would have been otherwise.
Before we go to Matt Stevens, Lauren Tate is now unmuted. Lauren, if you have a question for Josh.
I was going to ask Josh whether he had been very close at any point to having to impose furloughs or any kind of cuts in pay, which we see in a number of schools around the country in athletic departments. How close have you been, and have you done that at all?
Now, Lauren, why is it that we spend an hour talking about student athlete health, and you got to get on here and talk about money? It's like Lauren's go-to, right?
Well, I thought you'd answered everything else.
I certainly hope so. To answer your question, sure. I mean, I think that it's no secret that obviously this entire situation is presenting a great challenge for every college athletic program across the country, and Illinois is not exempt from that. And so we have been very aggressive in a number of the plans that we have instituted around trying to save money. We feel good about the steps that we have taken thus far. And we continue to evaluate other steps that we may have to take should certain situations develop in a certain way. And we, as anyone else, are watching everything that's happening around the country. There's only so many different levers you can pull. And we know that that's one that we haven't chosen to pull yet. And that's been a very intentional choice, as you would imagine. We didn't want to be premature in that decision. You start going into people's pockets, and that's something that we're going to be reluctant to do. And so we're trying to look out for the best interests of the athletic program. At the same time, we're also trying to look out for the best interests of our staff. And so doesn't mean that may not become necessary. But for now, we've been able to put that off as we've evaluated some other options and started to institute some other pieces to our plan. But it just as with the health and safety conversation, the financial conversation is ever evolving, very fluid, and we're continuing to evaluate it literally on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Yep.
Last question, Matt Stevens has a follow-up.
Josh, I was just curious if you've had communication and or concern about Lovey in a sense that he is inside, if not close to an age bracket that would be considered, a more vulnerable age bracket at 62 to the effects of the virus, and what his protocol might have to be, and might be a little different than everybody else when he interacts with these student athletes during not only these workouts, but as the fall semester and season maybe progresses.
It's a fair question. I guess what I would say in response, two things. Number one, Lovey will tell you he's in the best shape of his life, and that he has lost inches off his waist and would take anybody to the woodshed when it comes to a push-up contest. So Lovey feels very good about where he's at from a physical perspective. I think if we had an extra scholarship, we might consider putting him in a pair of shoulder pads and a helmet. But more broadly, the reality is that we have a lot of staff members and some student athletes who have any number of factors associated with them that potentially put them at a higher risk than others to be susceptible to the virus. And Lovey certainly isn't our only 60+ old employee. We have a number of staff members who have immune compromised conditions, who have different things that we've seen as being more at risk. And so part of our personnel process is working through with those individuals, asking them to self-identify if they have situations that they want us to be aware of that would potentially give them pause about coming back to work. And we will absolutely work to accommodate those situations on an individual basis. And so I appreciate the question about Lovey. But the reality is that with 300+ employees, we have a number of them who have similar considerations, and we're going to handle that on an individual basis with each and every one of them.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Appreciate that. As a very informative. And again, for those of you who will be back at 4 o'clock, Jeremy Bush, who's our head football trainer, will be on that call as well to help provide some perspective. Any other questions for Randy Ballard? I don't want to throw Randy on the spot, but he was on the call the entire time. Any technical questions regarding the plan to return here to campus for voluntary workouts? I don't see any hands. Oh, Gavin Good. Go ahead, Gavin.
Hey, Randy, I have a quick question, and I don't know if this was mentioned, so I apologize if it was, but is the plan to repeatedly test players, or is it to test them, like quarantine and test like one time and then have that be it?
No, there will be a repetitive test probably for the foreseeable future. We'll test on the front end and the back end of that quarantine process, which may be different from some of our peers. But as Josh said, priorities 1 through 5 are the health and well-being of our student athletes. And so working hand in hand with experts on campus and community health, we've put together what we feel is best, and that's testing on the front end of a quarantine and the back end of a quarantine. And then following that, yes, likely on weekly or biweekly measures, we will be doing repeat testing to identify, as we've seen, one of the biggest challenges with COVID is the fact that you can be asymptomatic and carrying it. And so not only will there be weekly testing, there will be daily, as I mentioned, we'll be doing that 72-hour out from their return questionnaire, but there'll be daily questionnaires and daily checkpoints, including temperature and pulse ox checks at the doors of our facility to try to identify any asymptomatic people so that we can make sure that we're not continuing the spread of COVID amongst our student athletes.
Thanks, Randy.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Anybody else before we wrap this up?
The lesson there is that I should have had Randy talk a whole lot more and me talk a whole lot less. He starts talking about temperature checks and pulse ox, and I'm way out of my depth in a hurry.
Well, Randy, you gave Randy and Jeremy a lot of credit at the beginning, and rightfully so. They put a lot of effort into the plan to get these student athletes back. So appreciate those guys for joining us today and being available. Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your afternoon. See you at 4 o'clock.
Thanks, everyone.